Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent.
Welcome back to the Aspire podcast. I'm Karen Udall, Program Director for I Have the Right To, and I have the honor of being the co-host for today's episode.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Karen. I'm Chessy Prout, co-founder of I Have the Right To. Today's episode focuses on something that sits at the heart of school culture, youth well-being, and prevention education. How we move beyond teaching health as a subject and start building environments where young people feel safe, respected, and supported.
Our guest today has spent more than 3 decades doing exactly that. Stacey Balducci recently retired after 30 years of teaching at Syosset High School, where she taught health and PE, advised student government, led community service through Interact, coached JV cheerleading, and mentored countless students.
Stacey is also an adjunct professor at Adelphi University, where she teaches future health educators, helping them translate theory into real-world practice, from violence prevention and consent education to mandated reporting, trauma-informed response, and peer-to-peer leadership. In today's conversation, we'll talk about what students are navigating now, what it really means to teach prevention responsibly, and how educators can move beyond compliance and checklists towards culture change that actually sticks.
We're excited to not only have Stacey with us today, but we are also joined by 2 of Stacey's students, Gabby and Anthony. As part of the course that she developed for Adelphi University, Stacey incorporated the book I Have the Right To, a high school survivor's story of sexual assault, justice, and hope by Chessy Prout. We have the opportunity to hear about the journey Gabby and Anthony experienced in reading I Have the Right To during the course of their semester, and how their college coursework has impacted their goals in becoming health educators.
This episode is about education that listens, leadership that empowers, and the belief that when we equip students thoughtfully, they can change the culture around them. We're so glad you're here. Let's get into the conversation.
Stacey, how do you describe the difference between teaching health and actually building a safer school culture after 30 years in a high school setting?
Well, first I want to thank you for being here. I have been following Chessy and her story since the beginning of it. On that first Dateline special, I was using that in my classroom to teach. So this means a lot to me, and I want to thank you so much for having us. I think teaching health is an instruction, and that teaching change is more of a culture and tying into everything that you do, not being in a textbook and just teaching definitions and terms, but teaching kids change, thought-provoking, real-life things is really what teaching health should be.
And that sort of reactive teaching is something that I really appreciate hearing an educator say, because so often it's easier to follow like a set curriculum and avoid hitting these sort of harder topics that might cause discomfort or spark uncomfortable conversations in the classroom. So when you think about the way that teens' lives have changed now with the state of social media, the state of the world, the access to the news, what feels different about the way that you talk to students about health education and teaching now compared to 5 to 10 years ago?
Right. Well, first of all, for 30 years, I've never used a textbook. I think we have one from probably 1999, just in case somebody was absent and we had to send something home. I have never used a textbook. Everything we've made in our department in the high school was self-created. So yes, things have changed in 5 or 10 years, but with health education, you should always be changing because health education is current and what's really out there. And that's why the Dateline I showed in my class for years, because it was real. What happened to Chessy is real. And that's what kids need to see, real. And we have to take those uncomfortable topics and make them comfortable for the students to be able to have somebody to talk to and to know where to go when they need help. In every topic I taught in my health, and I tell them this in September, and I remind them again throughout the course and at the end, for me, my main goal was in every topic, whether it was drug education, sex education, what are the signs that I need help, and where do I go and how do I ask for the help? So it's role playing, it's writing dialogues, it's real life stories. How do I know when I need the help? Eating disorders, mental health, and where do I go? In the school, outside of school, how do I ask my parents? That kind of thing. So I think, yes, it's changed. And social media has made that biggest change. But teaching health should always be current. So I guess I've changed with it.
And is there anything that you could share with our listeners, any meaningful moments from your experience as a teacher with your students in teaching these sort of topics and the way that you teach? Is there something that you could share with us that shows sort of the impact that you've been able to make with this style?
I think when students from the past that I'll see them and I remember this, do you remember that? And, and even having these two wonderful students here with me, I chose them because reading the book at the collegiate level, it impacted them and I could see it. And well, Anthony will probably tell you the story of when I overheard him talking and I walked up the steps and I was like, ding, 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 I got him, and just having the light bulbs go off. So I just think for new teachers, and that's why I'm teaching now that I've retired the high school, that's why I'm trying to motivate the new teachers to just make health education real and uncomfortable and talk about things that nobody's talking about with these kids. And if you can't do that, don't teach health because that's our job. Our job is to bring out the uncomfortableness, make it fun, make it in a way that we can talk about it so that students, get it. There's so much stuff on social media that kids don't know how to decipher, whether it's true, whether it's not true. We need to help these kids. They're a mess. They're a mess and we need to help them. And I know I was just one little high school teacher, but I'm trying now to spread it to college so when they go out that they can make the change.
You say one little high school teacher, but you impacted thousands, Stacey, and not just the students, but their parents, because the kids would go home and they would talk about it, and then it impacts the parents to hear about it, and then the parents talk to their friends. So I think that it's fascinating because in the work that we do at I Have the Right To, we see so many schools that have this institutional courage that it sounds like you had as a teacher from day one.
Well, I had the support to have that in our school. That was our department. That was all of us. That's just pretty much how we taught. And as far as the parents go, also, I would send home a lot to interview your parents just to get the conversation going. And on open school, and I said to the parents, I'm sending them home with stuff. And parents would come back and say, I don't want to do homework. I'm like, I'm trying to build a communication. It's not homework. It's talking to your kid about the sticky stuff that, like, how do you bring this up if a teacher doesn't say, go talk about it?
So when students hear violence prevention, a lot of them only end up thinking about extreme incidents. So how did you and how can future teachers broaden that conversation so that it does include these everyday sticky behaviors that you're talking about, like boundaries and respect?
Yeah, just again, making it real for them. I mean, in my high school class, asked students anonymously, who has ever been in a relationship or seen a relationship that was unhealthy. What was it? How did it start? What did you do? Blah, 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 blah. And when they answer, most of the time it's not about themselves because it's hard to look at yourself and see that you're in the unhealthy relationship. And we would dissect their stories and make lists of all the unhealthy kind of red flags that were going on. So just to make things real for them that, again, this isn't, yes, we see the Dateline stories and the true stories in the newspaper, but it's here. It's right in this classroom. And it was all anonymous because the point was not who's your friend, that wasn't the point. And I take all my classes and mix them up. So I had a nice, 100 students to go from. And it's very eye-opening to see because that student writing that card thinks I'm the only one who is either in one or has a friend who's in one. And I always say, you're not all writing about the same person. You know that, right? Like this happens because these kids don't know what is healthy because nobody talks about it. And what are they watching on TV? I just watched something and my daughter said, I'm going to embarrass myself. I had to write it down because I had to turn it off because I couldn't believe the lessons that it was teaching these kids. I wrote down the show, Tell Me Lies. Anybody watch that?
I watched that show, and it is insane the amount of psychological manipulation that happens. Yeah.
So now, as a health educator, I would have, if I was still in the high school, have to watch that show because that's what the girls would be talking about. And I would have to say to them, this is not healthy. Just like when you watch The Bachelor and Bachelorette, I'm like, that's not normal. No, but they love each other so much. You get to get back. No. That's not love. Kissing 10 people in an hour and picking one is not healthy. So it's challenging what these kids are learning and what they're watching that nobody knows.
It is really fascinating, the fact that, media is not age specific. Anybody can access anything that they want without any parental controls a lot of the time. But there is so much context that is missing from these pieces of media that even I can recognize moments when I would watch certain TV shows when I was younger and they take on a whole different meaning later in life when I recognize, oh man, that really is not an example of a healthy relationship. But there was no one to tell me that at the time. I had to come to that on my own and make mistakes along the way. So I think it's incredible that you as a teacher would watch the pieces of media that your students were watching, because I am a film and TV nerd. I work in film and television and podcasting production. And so I love having conversations with people about the shows that they're watching, what it means, how it makes them feel. But a lot of people do watch these programs without the context or ability to talk about it later. And
it's almost subliminally, they're getting the idea that this is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
When I first started teaching, I was Euphoria was big.
Yes.
When I first started teaching the college course of youth and violence, and we dissected that, I was like, oh, that was bad.
Right. And it's not aspirational. It's a reflection on the horrific nature of being a teenager. But I feel like if you get it at the wrong age, you can think, oh, that's the way life should look like, versus, oh man, I'm so glad I made it through a situation like that.
Yeah, because kids are so impressionable. So they're thinking, and all they have to hear is one kid go, that was so cool, what we saw. And they're like, oh, I guess that's cool. So it's such a challenge, and it's so hard. And I used to say to my students, I don't care if you get an A in this class. I'll give you all an A. I don't care. It's more 10 years down the line. Like, what are you doing? What are your behaviors? Are you healthy? Did you make good choices? Or, are you asking for help when needed? Are you going to therapy? Like, what are you doing in life? And then all the kids who would hear was, we're all getting an A. I'm like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Stacey, can I follow up on that for a minute? Do you feel like, you taught for 30 years and you're still teaching, but now this different age group. But if you go back to thinking about 30 years of teaching, I always joke that like a 16-year-old is a 16-year-old. Mm-hmm. Like a 16, and I'm going to genderize for just a moment, but a 16-year-old girl rolls her eyes at her mom. Like that's just everywhere in the world that happens. It's not like US centric. It's not only girls, it's any teen. But like, did you see that through the years of teaching, that there were some things that kids face no matter what culturally is happening outside?
Kids make bad decisions. And throughout the years, maybe the decisions changed or the things that they were doing changed, but kids make bad choices because that's how they learn. So I always told them, I know you're going to make bad choices. I just want you to make little bad choices and not big bad choices that are going to shape the rest of your life. We all make bad decisions and we learn and we grow. And that's just life. I would say life is just full of bumps. Boop, ba-doop, ba-doop. Life is great. I made the captain of the team. I got my A+ on my test. And then boom, something bad happens. It's coping skills that make us healthy to learn how to get us through. So I think bad decisions, bad things happening is constant. what I've seen change was when I started teaching at Syosset High School, I was 24 years old. I left at 55 years old. So I grew and changed. I became a parent, made me a better teacher. Teaching made me a better parent. And I just realized probably when I started, I cared more about the grades. We never taught from a textbook, but probably more about the grades. When as the years went by, I was like, this is more, has to be more practical than this. They have so much pressure. Syosset High School is an excellent school, a lot of AP courses, a lot of tests. Let's just get into a classroom where we sit in a circle, we break into groups. I had rolly chairs so that they could just roll on into groups, get rid of your computers, put your phones away, and let's just have conversations. So I think kids are the same with different pieces, but this technology and social media is making it really difficult. I think that's the biggest change that we've seen in the kids. And then COVID happened right after. So I think that made kids change, but kids are still kids and still doing dumb things that we want to help them, guide them through them.
It's so amazing to hear you talk and emphasize these sort of guiding practices versus the telling practices that so many teachers, I feel like, tend to adopt when they're in the classroom. But so much of your work also emphasizes the importance of peer-to-peer communication and education. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about the peer teen leaders and your work with that group?
Sure. We had a great program at Syosset High School where starting in ninth grade all the way through seniors, it was a peer-to-peer teaching program. So ninth grade, they would go to the elementary schools. I was the 10th grade. We would teach other 10th graders, 11th graders. Everybody kind of had a role to do in what they were doing in the school. And for example, when I was in 10th grade, we would go into the phys ed classes and teach 2 lessons a marking period. And those lessons were real life things. And one of the lessons, I was thinking about this yesterday, was my students wrote a script. I believe I did this activity actually in Adelphi as well and showed them this activity. And it's called Stay or Go. And it was a relationship story. So and I made the names gender neutral because this happens in all types of relationships, doesn't matter the sex of the people. So Jordan and Sam met in 10th grade and blah, blah, blah. And I'd use real names around Syosset, the diner, the places they hang out, the Starbucks. And as the story goes, we would stop and say, now, is on your paper, right, if you would stay in this relationship? Is this a healthy relationship? Or would you leave and why? And in the first scenario, he didn't like what she was wearing to go out. And he asked her to change because he was embarrassed. She was too sexy. And a lot of girls would say, well, I think that's flattering. And I'm like, but nobody should tell you what to wear. So it was very interesting. So there was no talking. And then it increasingly gets physical until the end. And then they're out, they say. And then they come back in because he sweet talks them. And then they leave. So it's just, making it real life. I don't even remember what your question was.
Talking about the Peer Health Symposium and the peer-to-peer work. Yeah.
Thank you. So that lesson, the students did and taught to students of their own age. So we developed that lesson in 10th grade. I was making little mini teachers. I would teach them how to write lessons, of course, helping them. And I would say, you know what, you are so ahead of the game if you want to be a teacher or work in business, making presentations, because they learned how to create a lesson with different activities. We took that lesson. The 10th graders taught it to the 10th graders. Now you talk about, telling a student what's right and wrong. Well, they're students teaching teachers. Who are they going to listen to more and respect more and value their opinion? Me or my 10th grade students? Them. So the 10th graders are now telling them, well, why isn't this healthy in a relationship? And blah, 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 blah. So it was really the peers to peers. We just believe kids listen better to kids. We know that. So that probably started 30 years ago when I went there. They had the peer leadership program. It was only in 11th and 12th grade. And then they brought it down to 9th and 10th years later. So, and I always tell the kids in Syosset High School, I feel like I'm like promoting Syosset High School, but we had the best health education program, I truly believe, with people who really cared about the kids, who really wanted to make a difference and change their thinking and help them.
Well, it makes me wish that I had you as a teacher, because my health teacher didn't teach any of this when I was young. Um, we talk about that peer-to-peer kind of training at I Have the Right To as well, where when we go into schools and we have different workshops, a lot of our facilitators are college age or just out of college. And that resonates with the students that we're working with. I mean, I can go in and I can talk about certain things. And yes, my story or my academic experience definitely can have a singular impact in the moment. But knowing that when something goes right or wrong in a teen's life, they turn to their peers. And so knowing that these teens are getting kind of that stay or go education, or that training that you gave them to be able to look ahead, it really is remarkable. I mean, you say you're one teacher, but it really, I mean, it impacted them for sure. I can tell that did. And the way that you present it is so genuine. And that's what kids today need. So as you're educating these teachers, future teachers, to help them understand that is what today's students seem to be about, is authenticity and being genuine and being real. And you did that for years with your kids. And it's great.
And that's why I brought Chessy's story and the Dateline, because I'm like a Dateline true crime freak. So I everything I watched that, I'm like, oh wow, the students can relate to this one. And it was before you weren't even a name on that show, but just discussing it and discussing, the senior salute, and in college too. We said, what did you have in your school relative to that? And whew, my goodness, eye-opening. And now to the college students, you're on the other side. You're the teacher now. You're the grown-up. How are you going to deal with that in your school? And actually, when we read the book this semester, there was a student who was going through a very similar situation in his high school. And he was just a coach. He's like, I don't want to get involved and I don't want to, talk about it. He's like, but I cannot believe that the same situation is happening as I'm reading this book in his school. So this happens, and kids need to know what to do. And Chessy, you were so awesome about handling everything and coming out and talk about reaching people. I mean, you have reached so many people with your story and the book and changed so many people's lives for the better. So
thank you. And I know, like, almost 10 years after I came forward publicly, and 12 years now since my assault, it is really frustrating and frightening to hear that these sort of games are still played at schools and that kids are still experiencing the same sort of harassment that comes from reporting a sexual assault. It can feel very demoralizing, but at the same time also inspires me to keep going, because it is so important to give people the language to know how to respond in situations like this, because so much harm is caused in the response to somebody disclosing a sexual assault. And so when you talk to your students now who might someday be in a position to hear disclosures of sexual assault or deal with these issues at the schools that they teach at, how do you instruct them to respond to disclosures, or do you talk to them about responding to disclosures of students?
yes, and actually, of course I'm teaching next semester is adolescent mental health. So yeah, they're going to be hearing a lot of things from their students. If you make yourself the teacher that wants to have them come to you. And I've heard a lot of things, from suicide to pregnancies to sexual assault over the years. And I think what the most important thing to do for your student is listen. It's just listen, and don't go, because in my head a lot I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. Just listen. Just listen. Now, I am not a social worker. I am not a mental health professional. So encouraging that student to go get other help and tell somebody, by not saying, I'm going to call the social worker and they're going to be in, but saying, can we go together? When a student tells you something, they want you. So you are now designated to stay with them throughout that process. But I can't do the process on my own because I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not certified to do that. So it was always me taking them to someone within the school and staying with them throughout the process is how I handle it. And just to listen, no judgment. No, what did you do? Why'd you do that? No judgment. A victim is never wrong. Never. I don't care if you say, well, why did they go there? It doesn't matter. They didn't ask for any of this. So that's kind of how I would tell my students to do that.
I was just taken aback. To know that you walk them through and to teach future teachers to do the same is really impactful for the victim, to know that they're not by themselves and to know that they're being heard and seen. How do you teach going before something happens? I mean, we talk about prevention and intervention, but how do you teach consent in a way that it stays practical for these teenagers rather than feeling like this is a one-time thing? But I mean, you've clearly been there for them when they did have something that they needed to disclose. How do you go back to say, okay, how do we teach about it before this happens?
So I have my daughter's a first grade teacher, and her boyfriend were here yesterday, and we were talking about the podcast. And he said, oh, I think I learned about consent in 7th grade. And I was like, what? He's like, you think it should be earlier? I'm like, you should be learning consent from the time that your friend takes your crayon in kindergarten. Consent is not a one-shot thing. Consent is about everything in your friendships. They're like, well, how do you talk about this to first grade? I'm like, you talk about your friends and giving consent for them to take your things or to, I don't know. It has to be all the time so that when it is introduced in a sexual relationship, it's not like eye-opening. At the high school level, because I can't control what everybody else is doing, at the high school level, I just try to make it practical and talk about how silly it is that if I went and just grabbed Chessy's phone, she'd be like, hey, give me my phone back. But I need a phone. Well, why didn't you ask me? And well, why can't we do that about sex? I have a whole activity where 2 people sit together and make a pizza. And how do you make this pizza? And I say, you have to agree on the pizza that you're both going to eat. You have to agree. So I hear them talking it through. So why can't we just take this pizza activity and kind of carry it over to a sexual relationship and talk it through before? So I try to make it practical so it's like in their heads when it comes time to really put it to use. And a lot of role playing, a lot of dialogue, making a dialogue, talking about it. This is stupid. Well, just write down, because the more you have it in your head, when the time comes, yes, it's stupid to sit in a classroom and pretend that you're going to have sex and write a dialogue talking about it. Yes. But when the time comes, because you did it, it's already back there somewhere. And I always say, I don't want to be in your relationships with you. I just want to be that person on your shoulder going like, she said I should talk about it.
It's so true, though. Like, you think about things that are important to people, like a job application, a college application, an essay that's worth 40% of your grade. You don't just write it once. I mean, sometimes I would when I was really stuck on a deadline because I like to procrastinate. But if I did, it would be a bad grade and it would impact me. You can't put yourself, or you can't expect to be put in situations and know exactly what to do. And I think I felt that for a long time because I thought I was mature. I was told I was mature for my age, that I could connect with adults well. I thought I was worldly and could handle myself. But there is so much value in practicing saying no. We talked about this with Meg Stone in a previous podcast episode, but my older sister had gone to a self-defense course, a feminist self-defense class, and they had the students practice saying no and creating a stance, a physical stance with their bodies that they would be comfortable saying no in and feeling it and knowing it. And it does feel silly. It feels silly at first to practice things that you might think that you're supposed to know how to do regularly, but there is so much value in practice, in preparing yourself, and not just for situations in which you might be victimized, because that puts a lot of the onus and blame then on the person who's being victimized to prepare themselves, which should not have to happen. But starting with saying no to a parent or to a classmate or to a boss, or, expressing your own opinions in a situation, in a group project, practicing that can then help prepare you for instances later in life when you need to stand up for yourself in different situations. So I think it's so valuable that you have your students and encourage your students who are then going to become teachers to practice scenarios, because it can feel weird, it can feel funny, but it's so worthwhile. It's like you wouldn't give a speech without practicing it. There's so much value in practice, which I say as a former piano player who was told to practice, 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 and liked to play things by ear and not practice. So
I also tell my students, you have to learn a little bit to trust your gut too. Like, if it feels wrong, it's probably wrong. If you're questioning it, it's wrong. If you just feel uncomfortable or not right, it's wrong. So, and that's a hard thing to teach, but just, you have to go with how you feel about things. I would tell them a story about a girl that I knew through my own children, who was slipped a date rape drug and kind of left on a corner at a bar. And talk about, and they'll, but they know the college and they know, my kids. So once you make things real too, it really helps, I think, to educate them. But definitely practice, and following your gut is a big thing.
And yeah, so much of these conversations that we can have about these hypothetical situations or examples can be kind of vague, especially when we get into terms like you got to seek a healthy relationship or, communication. But can you share with us any clear teachable skills that you think students need the most, or people need the most in to be able to have healthy relationships and clear communication with their peers?
Yeah, I think just being able to speak freely their mind, and like I said, follow your gut and be able to tell people how you feel. And for some reason, when we're seeing on social media pictures of all these pretty seniors and juniors, and they're so pretty, and we think everybody's got a great relationship. That's a snapshot. That's not really what's happening. And I think they don't realize that. Another lesson that my peers were doing to peers was taking snapshots off of social media and asking them in groups to describe what you think is going on. They're in a great relationship, blah, 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 blah. And then they tell them the truth. Well, behind the scenes, she has an eating disorder, and she was so nervous about getting in that bikini that she was making herself purge for 2 weeks before this trip. And they're like, oh. You're only seeing that little snapshot. So just trying to make them think there's more behind the snapshot. It's hard. It's really hard. It's so, it's the best topic to teach, I think. It's always changing. There's current stuff. It's stuff in the media, but it's challenging. Because again, I don't know if, I can give you a test and you can get an A+. Who cares if you could define things? I don't care. How do I know if they're applying it? I don't know. I hope they are.
Well, the snapshot in this little blip in time when my kids were younger, I would say, we would send them off on picture day, and we knew it was picture day, and you got the form in advance. I don't even know if that's how they do it now as my kids are a bit older, but my daughter will tell you that her 3rd grade photo is like the pièce de résistance of all of her photos of the years, because we didn't remember that it was picture day. And so she was in the most ridiculous clothing that day. She did not even brush her hair. And that was her photo it was in the yearbook. It lives on now forever because yearbooks are now digitized. And it's a running joke in our family, but she was my 3rd. And by the time I got to her, I thought, well, that's what you looked like that day. Where with my oldest, we did a retake a couple of years in a row because it wasn't a good picture I'll put that in air quotes. And with her, it was like, well, that's what you looked like that day. That's who you were that day. Your hair was messy and your shirt was, I'm sure there were stains. But to know, like, on the flip side, that is what's happening in social media today, moving so far forward of, you're seeing a blip in time and you're not seeing what's real. And so getting deeper and really talking about how to apply these concepts is what can make the difference for prevention, for intervention, for healthy relationships. I don't tell that story to say that as a mom, I did all the good things. I did lots of wrong things. I could make you a far bigger list of the things that I made mistakes at than the things that I did well. But I'd love to know what role can the parents play? What role can family play in how the students are learning these concepts in school? What can the families do? How do we bring the families into the conversation?
It's hard. I mean, I recall telling my students a lot of times, I don't teach your parents, so I can't tell them how to make differences and changes, but I could tell you how to make a change that might change their perspective. I can't change them. I can only change you. As a parent, I just think, again, listening is the most important things. How many times I've said to my own children, who cares? And you know what they say back to me? I do. That's why I'm talking to you. I'm like, oh, yeah. About a bully situation. Who cares? Just forget it. Well, I care. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's why you're telling me. It's hard. We're all busy. We work a lot. I worked full time. I would come home. I'd have cheerleading practice. I'd come home. And then my kid is talking to me about their stupid, middle school drama stuff. Yeah, it's not stupid to them. To me, it was stupid. To them, it was important. Again, I would send kids home with interviews, just talk to your parents about how they feel about this. When I taught through the AIDS crisis, like I've sent home for years interviews. What's your parents' first memory of HIV? When did they learn about AIDS? How were they educated? Things like that. So just sending home interviews to try to open up dialogue, but I can't make a parent want to do that. And I would always tell the kids, and I probably said it in the college level too, you could lie on a lot of this. You might not have, read Chessy's book, but still gotten an A+. Good for you. Yay. But you didn't learn anything and you didn't grow, and you're not going to be a great teacher because you didn't want to put in the work and you didn't want to learn and grow. So I can't make you want to do that. But if you do the assignments, you can learn and grow and change. So you could fake it. It's very easy today with ChatGPT. They could say, give me a summary of Chessy Prout's book, chapter 1 through 4. I know that. I'm not dumb, but you're not going to learn anything. So, I can't teach the parents. I only had them one night. Right. One of the best lessons that I've done, and kids have come back and said to me, through the years, like I still have that, is I would have them write a letter to their kids, telling them about their strengths, the day they were born or adopted, what's their biggest fear for them, what do they want for them in the future. They'd have to give the letter to me in a sealed envelope so that I had the whole class. And then we do a day where the students read it. They didn't read it to me. They read it to themselves. They'd write their parent back, and I could give it back to them on open school night. So this way parents would come see me because nobody sees the health teacher. So the kids would say, go get my letter from the health teacher. So I'd get a chance to see them. And then we would talk about families, and we'd talk about if they wanted to share things from their letters, what did your parents say were their biggest fears and things like that. And that was a really great lesson to kind of open up and hopefully improve the relationship with their parent. And if a parent wouldn't write it, which usually they would, they could do an aunt or an uncle or a sibling, but usually they would get one parent, sometimes two, to write that letter. And I always tell them, save it, because one day when you're fighting with your parents, this is how they really feel about you. Parents fight with kids. This is how they feel. So I tried as much as I could, but you don't really have that contact with the parents in the high school level.
Well, hearing you talk about becoming a good educator and finding ways to do that, I would love to introduce or to bring in Gabriela and Anthony into the conversation right now. Gabriela and Anthony, would you be able to introduce yourselves?
How you doing? I'm Anthony Capozucca. I'm a senior at Adelphi, just finishing up the final ends of my physical education career and a health career. Just finished my semester with Professor Balducci. And if I had to say like a goal of where I'd really like to see where my education goes, I was raised by a single mom. So the teachers, the community, and the coaches, I believe, really help do raise people and set a really good tone for children if you have the right support and community around you. So my main goal is just to be a good educator, a leader, a helper, and hopefully someone impactful enough in my community where I could be someone that these kids go to or that people in the community can go to, where I can help guide them or at least help them with whatever is going on in their lives. Because they were there for me a lot and they've never failed me yet. So I hope I can emulate what I've gotten to be a part of.
Hi, I'm Gabriela. I'm in my junior year of Adelphi for the physical education program. My, goal with this program is to be a health or phys ed teacher. Originally, I was just going in to be a phys ed teacher. A few semesters ago, I started to really like the idea of health, and then especially taking, Professor Balducci's course, I gained a lot more of a passion for it. So I'd say they're on the same level, possibly health even a little more, to be a health teacher than a phys ed teacher. Yeah, and I just really love to pour into these kids. Like we said, they're all lost. They all need help. They all need someone to listen to. And I just want to be able to be that professional for them in the ways that I should be. Yeah.
It's really cool to hear you guys talk about the reasons why you want to become health educators and physical educators. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your guys' experiences with health education in your own schooling careers. What was your health course like? Are there things that you would take from your health classes in middle school or high school? And are there things that you know for sure that you would definitely change?
So through like my health education journey, we didn't really do anything in high school. It was only in middle school. And she was a very nice lady. We learned about like the drunk goggles and did a fun, cool like power nap activities and stuff. But even I think like I grew up always being an athlete and like being healthy and doing sports. So I only envisioned and encompassed health as like a physical aspect of like how you look, how you're eating, how you wake up and sleep. And I think taking this one at the college level has really like broadened my horizon on the layers of what health could actually be and how people could actually think besides my own perspective. And this is going to sound silly, but I love the quote. And I always think back to Shrek when I think about this class because he goes, ogres are like onions. There's layers to it. And it always made me think because I was like, as much as we see the problem from an outside existing perspective, we don't know what steps led to that or what is actually creating this problem or this perspective. And I think I'd really like to go more towards Professor Balducci's teaching of health because it's almost a little bit easier. Like they already have gym class and there is signs on the wall to help you with how you're going to eat and whatnot. But they don't always teach you how to approach these emotional or spiritual or mental aspects that you have and these mountains you must have to climb at one point in your life. So like you already had the got milk on the wall and the food pyramid. So I think taking the perspective of doing the onion and doing more layers into it and getting into the actual human experience is what I'd really like to take and carry on with. Because I think we already do such a dive into the health aspect of just physical and how you eat. And I think we need to broaden that within the schools so kids can really get help.
So to bounce off of what Anthony was saying, I feel like a lot of times in health, in high school, I think I only took it for half a year in total. So I only remember, like he said, a few of the drug things. In middle school, it's also one full year, I think, or half. I don't know. It's still not a lot. And so the main focus is usually how you eat, drugs. And I remember a tiny bit of social interactions, but it was almost like, oh, breeze over because these things are much more important, which they're all important. Like, don't get me wrong. But I feel like it's missing a huge real life aspect piece and the big why piece. It was just a lot of, oh, here's a bunch of slides, do a project on drugs. And it was just like, yes, use the scare tactic for drugs and STD. Yeah, okay, a little bit. But also say the why and that there's more than just, the consequence of getting an STD or, becoming a drug addict by doing drugs, or consent, or things that you don't know. So I would be a lot more like Professor Balducci's way of teaching, more peer on peer, teaching them the big why, bring real life stuff into it, relatable, because otherwise it's just going to go in one ear, out the other.
That was something that stuck with me so much from my education was, I think in a psychology class, I learned that our brains tend to remember things better when we're able to connect them back to ourselves. And so giving people stories and examples in their own lives and in their peers' lives makes it so much easier to remember things and things that might help them later in life. And it's cool to hear you talk about too, that yes, there are some big button issues that might be easier to talk about because they're very dangerous and they're scary and they're impactful. But there is so much that causes those big issues that when you can intervene earlier on when it comes to mental health and students feeling supported and access to mental health resources and information about consent so that they feel more in control of their bodies and maybe don't have to resort to other ways to feel in or out of control that could then lead to drug use or abuse of alcohol. You get to those issues so much earlier. And it's really wonderful to hear you guys talk about the ways that you're going to attack these issues and still get to these big button topics that need to be discussed, but do it in a way that might actually work better, which is exciting. So yeah, I'm so excited that you guys are here today, and thank you for sharing your reasons why you're doing the work that you're doing.
I would love to ask you both. We know that Dr. Balducci or Stacey has incorporated Chessy's memoir in her course and has done so for her high school as well. What did each of you, and Anthony, I'll have you start, and then Gabby, but what did each of you learn from reading I Have the Right To that you felt like you didn't learn from your other research articles or other coursework that you did?
So for the first thing I'd like to get into is when we were talking about health classes before, a lot of times it's, hey, read this article or respond within this week. And then you go through so many topics so fast. I think the great thing about reading Chessy's book is it was something we came back to every week. So, and you got to discuss it with your peers. And then at the point of where you're at 10 weeks of reading it, you start really seeing how it's applicable to life because you keep looking back at it. And I think that was one of the major things for me. And it helped me finally see someone else's perspective truly for the first time. Because we live in our own perception of reality. And it was eye-opening for me. It was mind-blowing. It changed my whole idea of thinking. She heard me come up the stairs, Professor Balducci. I was calling my mom and my sister. It was mind-blowing because I never understood that this perspective can be something, an actual reality. You watch TV, you do whatever. And then I even called and spoke to my mom and my sister, and they spoke to me on the topic, and I felt like I learned a whole new part about my mom and my sister. This is such a thing you can never know unless you really take the time to learn about somebody or the thing going on. And I think it changed my whole approach towards the consent and the healthy relationships because I explained earlier, I was a kid, I was an athlete. You grow up in this male bravado of hey, you have to be a certain way. You should go get with girls, you should do this, you could do whatever. And we were saying before, you might be at that party where your buddy tries to kiss a girl and then they laugh it off or whatever. But after reading this and actually seeing what somebody can go home and think about and how it can affect them, it was it's not as funny as a joke. You don't know how she feels going into the halls the next day. As a guy, we're sometimes built to be desensitized to it and almost overlook it and be hey, buddy, you got practice tomorrow. Get out of here. Go do whatever. And this was the first time I kind of took a step back from just being a dude and looked at everybody as a person. And it was eye-opening. And I almost I'm getting shivers right now because I almost got the fear and the perspective what if this happens to one of the women that I love, my mom or my sister or my cousins, and we don't even know? So it even changed how I approach to even go speak and talk to women and do whatever. And like, I believe I've always been a nice guy. I hold women in such a high regard. I love my mother and my sister. They've done everything for me in my own. They still do. They're angels. But it even changed how like I view the little things, because you don't know how that person's perspective of reality is going. And honestly, it's the first time I don't know, like it took me out of almost a selfish male mentality of how you approach these things of like, oh, like getting with a girl is like a goal, like doing whatever, to like, when she goes home, like you'd hope that everybody can go home being happy at the end of the day. So is it worth the selfish bravado of being like, oh, I'm a dude, or really incorporating other people into the world? And I think that changed my whole perspective. I was still call my mom about it, but it was beautiful. And I really think the constant reminder of the book really helps you put it into reality, and you get to see how it's applicable to your life and the people around you and the scenarios going on. And it was a beautiful thing.
And thank you so much for sharing your experience in reading my book and what it brought to you, and for being open about it, because yeah, we need people to be more open, I feel like, too, about things that they learn from other people's stories. And yeah, thank you.
If anything, thank you. Because I had no idea. And honestly, I probably would have went the rest of my life having no idea. Unless like I sat and I listened to the book in your voice, and it was just very impactful. I was thinking about my sister. I was getting like shivers. I teared up at some points. I'm not going to lie. It was intense. And I was like, everything I knew is different from what I thought. And it was a very eye-opening moment. Thank you.
So for me, the one thing I want to say is that I was going to say the same thing that Anthony said in the beginning, is that like actually focusing on the book and talking about it as a class. Obviously, you can't do that with everything. It doesn't work in every curriculum. But even if you do have an article that you send home with kids, to talk about it the next day, to like come back and do the questions like you do in English class. But instead of like, oh, do you understand if this is the right answer or not? It's like, oh, talk about why did you put this answer? So like getting that perspective of the book and hearing other people's perspectives, because people just have a bunch of different perspectives, and you learn so much hearing from other people, along with the fact of, you know, what textbooks can teach and what they can't. They can't teach you what a real life experience looks like. You see all these articles and, oh, this happened to so-and-so, oh, you know, this court case, but this is a book actually describing someone's personal real life experience, their feelings, talking to their family, talking to friends, betrayal, like it's a real thing. So I really liked getting that from someone else. And it also just really taught me that when I was in high school and middle school, even young adult, like I thought I knew certain things. And then I also knew that I didn't know what consent was and all these things. Like I really wasn't taught that. But after reading this book, I was like, wow, no, like I really didn't know. And that's an issue. And I want to be able to teach that to all these other kids, because it's just so important. It would have saved me a lot of personal trauma myself. Like, you know, I related to, unfortunately, a lot in the book. And it's just very, like, I want to be able to give kids knowledge that I didn't have, you know? And of course, it's up to them to receive it. I can try my best. Like, you know, you said before, it's up to them. It's up to them to take it home to their parents. Like, you know, some kids are just not receptive, but the point is that it's there somewhere.
Thank you, Gabriela, too, for sharing your experiences and for all of what you just said. And I wanted to share with you guys what I heard from a head of school at an all-boys school called the Zavarian Brothers School in Massachusetts. After we did a sort of a day or a couple days of programming at the school with their students, he said that he was looking around the room and he recognized as an educator, you know, three kinds of students. One, the first kind of student was, you know, elbows on their knees forwards, looking intently at the presentation and the presenter and understanding it, getting it, was hungry for the information that we were providing. The second kind of student was sitting there like, okay, I'm listening, but kind of checking out, kind of zoning back in, zoning back out, and might not know yet why they're learning about this topic, about consent, healthy relationships, and boundaries. And then there's the third student who might have fallen asleep, who might be actively upset that they have to sit through a presentation like this and talk about this kind of stuff and don't think it relates to them at all. But he said he knows and he guarantees that someday, each type of student will come back to these presentations and will take something from it. And that third student might down the road have a child or a sibling who goes through something similar, and they'll be able to finally reach back into their back pockets and remember these presentations and the stories that they heard. So regardless of where it hits the students as you teach them these things in the moment, I hope you know that what you say and what you do will impact them later on, and they can always reach back and recognize things in those stories that they heard years ago that might help them in their future lives. And I do think it's so important. I love reading other people's stories. I love hearing about the inner lives of other people. One of my favorite children's books growing up was called The English Roses, which was written by Madonna, strangely enough. And it's a beautiful book. I have it in my bookshelf behind me, but part of the story is that there's this group of mean girls at school, or maybe not mean, but cool girls, and they don't understand one of their peers. They don't understand why she's disheveled and she's quiet, and they kind of look down on her because she's not put together. And through some sort of magic, they're able to view what her home life is like. And they realize that she's got a single parent at home. She's doing a lot of the tasks at home. There's so much. It's just a great reminder that every single human being that we see has their own private world that we will never have access to. And yet I don't think that should stop us from trying to understand and recognize the impact of our actions. And it makes me really honored and humbled to hear from both of you your experiences reading my story, because that's all I wanted out of writing my story down and sharing it publicly, was that people might understand at least one person's experience with sexual assault, with my mental health struggles, and might look at their peers or people around them with a softer eye. So I'm just, at a loss for words just hearing you guys speak. And on the topic of reading this book in your class with Professor Balducci, thinking back to other topics that you guys discussed in the classroom and other things that you read and learned in this class, can you talk a little bit more about how this course changed the way that you might think about health education, from the way that you deliver the information and what kind of information you deliver in the first place?
I would like to tie back to what Professor Balducci and even Gabby were going into before. I think the real people and the real encounters and the real stories really do make a difference without too many reels. But it makes such an impact because as we read your story, you do stuff. You read about a girl who's 15 or whatever, and it might not get you right away, but after you're a little bit in and you learn about the topic, you look at whoever your friends was that's 13, and then you look at that, you really try to implement how this could affect your life. And I think that's a lot better perspective and a way to go about teaching these things than, like we were saying, the vague, just brush over, go over the topic real quick, give you a quiz, see you next week. Worst case scenario, I give you a little quiz that you probably cheat off at the end of the day. The idea of how Ms. Balducci took it to where you come in and you discuss it with your peers, so you even remember what your friends are saying, their perspectives. Like we said, you always remember your peers and your friends and what they say. It's so impactful versus almost sometimes more than a teacher. So if I had to try to do it, I'd like to keep the realism of you work with your classmates, you speak to the people around you, you get to know them in depth, you listen to a story that could be applicable to your life, and that you can actually use and try to implement the better things that you learn from it. And I think when we keep it more personable like that, you tend to leave with the lesson for the rest of your life instead of just learning something that class. And I would like to carry that on if I ever could.
Throughout the course, the way that Balducci taught was she introduced a lot of handouts and just fun things, fun scenarios that at first you're like, what the heck is this? What am I doing? But they remember the scenario like I did, instead of, oh yeah, I remember this 20-question quiz about how, steps of making good decisions. And you could literally do that with drugs, with, STDs, legitimate health, eating, all these things. You can do it all with that instead of giving a quiz.
I love hearing your excitement, both of you, about the future of your futures about teaching. I feel like I don't know about your other coursework that you've done at Adelphi, but I can tell that this course in particular really impacted you, and it challenged you. It made you realize there are so many other ways to teach, not just from a textbook or from research articles, but to really incorporate so many different elements and avenues, whether it's handouts or conversations or, Stacey mentioned earlier that in high school, her kids had rolling chairs. And I'm sure with your coursework, she brought you together and grouped you up. And just to hear all the different ways that you can incorporate the concepts. Were there any concepts that you covered during the course, youth and violence or consent or healthy relationships? Was there any concept that challenged what you thought you might teach future students versus once you took this course, you realized, oh, wait, I have to teach this to future students?
I think definitely with the consent, like we were saying, we should definitely broaden that. But from like how I grew up, one of the major things was like when I came to this class, it was youth and violence. And I wrestled and I've done a lot of combat sports or whatever. And when I hear youth and violence, I only thought of like kids fighting, like physical altercations and like maybe like some like horrible verbal things. But after like Professor Balducci goes into it, and like into the level of social media and how things can follow them home and like all these other things can build up to play a part in this giant puzzle that's the person, it broadened my range on how I even viewed youth and violence, because it does come to just doing little things in like the lunchroom to somebody, to making that weird Snapchat or the Instagram post or the little hateful comment, and how they do it on so many different layers and just right in front of somebody now. Or like it doesn't even always come to just hitting somebody. There's hours and hours of internet conflict before that, and a bunch of other things, and like the rumors and the way kids react now. I think it really broadened like on how I'd like to tackle the issue, because I only purely viewed it from a physical aspect. Like I've wrestled, I played football, whatever, and like, yeah, you see kids fight all the time, and that's all I really thought it was. And as me and you were speaking before, Mrs. Udall, like kids don't have it the same where they just fought at school anymore. Like there's so much social media and stuff that this always follows you home. This follows you on vacation. Your parents can probably Google it if they look up your name. It is everywhere, to where you really have to tackle kids being good from the source so it doesn't get to that crazy extent, and try to give them the tools and at least the right train of thought to either consider the other person or not do it, or have the means to react in a healthy way without ever putting them at risk or someone else at risk, and really giving them the tools and the capability to adapt and grow as the times go and be able to cope with the things that they need to.
The scary thing is, and I think Gabby said before, that you only had health half a year in middle school and half a year in high school. And that's the requirement in the state. So how could you do all this? That's one of the biggest problems. But yeah, science, you take 4 years, and math you have to take all the time. But this is like a person. Like, what's more important than that? So that's our challenge.
Yeah, to go off of that, I was going to say I feel like all the topics are equally high in priority. I couldn't pick one. Every one, it's like, oh yes, definitely this one, definitely this one. But what we can do in a short period of time is like you both started saying, teach them strategies, teach them the warning signs, what to look for, and try your best to give them the tools in the short period of time that you have with them. Maybe even send them home with certain workouts or make them make their own website. I don't know, just things, save documents, just think to have resources to go back to. That's really what I would focus on.
It's amazing to hear you guys talk about the tangible ways that you're going to bring the things that you're learning right now in your classrooms to your future classrooms, which is a little bit of an inception sort of situation, but it's really exciting to be talking to future health educators who will be doing such good work. And, hopefully you guys will also continue your education in this area as well, because like Professor Balducci said, you've constantly got to adapt with what these kids are going through at the times. Now, I wanted to bring this back to Professor Balducci as someone who's educated hundreds, maybe thousands of youth in high school and college spaces. In your experience, we talked about the concrete things that you might teach in the classroom, the activities, but as an educator, could you explain to us a little bit what helps a student feel safe enough to ask for help in the first place? And how can you, as an educator, practice being a safe adult? We talk a lot about kids finding safe adults, but I feel like we need to talk more to adults about being a safe adult. And, you mentioned some things earlier about sticking with the kids and making sure that you go with them and help them find the right resources. But if you could speak a little bit more about that, and also maybe what makes an adult not safe to go to, that would be really great.
So when you walked into my classroom, and it's a high school classroom, we don't always all have our own classroom. I made it as welcoming as I could, even in high school. I had bulletin boards. I had personal things about me. 2 years ago, I got a dog, so it was all like puppy pictures. I have all of my years of coaching, those pictures up. So just to remind the students that, like, I am a person and I have a life, and this is my life. I'm the same as you. I'm older, but I still have a life. And I would talk about my children and the things that I love to do. At the beginning of the year, when I was doing all getting to know you stuff, I'm participating with them, the students interviewing me and introducing me, just to make them remind you I'm not this teacher who's aloof. I am a teacher who is here for you. And I even remember years ago, and I still speak to the student, a parent coming to me and saying, my child is going through something tough and they feel like you're the teacher they want to talk to. I'm like, wow, they have never said boo in my class. They have never approached me or talked to me. So you don't have to actually have conversation just to be that teacher. That's like the one that they're going to come to. So I just think being a person, again, just listening. We don't have to give advice. Listen, just listen. And to let them know that, I would tell stories. I had a friend. I said, it might be me, it might be a friend, but I had a friend who blah, 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 blah. And just to share things also that make it that it's real. So they know that what you're going through is real. And I also do love, Chessy, to me, true stories, like true things, are impactful. So I'm going to tell truths about me as well. Now, there are plenty of things that I did in high school that I'm not going to share because I am a teacher. But I might say my friend, and just to share that I've been there with them. Anthony, I'm not sharing. He's smiling. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes as teachers get older, we tend to disconnect to the generation. And again, you have to stay up to date in technology. You have to go on that Instagram, even if you don't want to, just to see what it is. If the kids are talking about it and they're in your classroom, you have to know. Now, I'm teaching a subject where it's easier for me because it's health. I don't have a curriculum. I don't have a test. I don't have a Regents. I don't have to do an AP. So for me, for some teachers, they're like, but I didn't become a teacher to have that. I'm teaching my subject of math, social studies, English. Well, then you're doing a little bit of a disservice not having a little bit of a relationship with these kids. We're with them a lot of the day. They're in that school. So, I just think being approachable, happy, and I think I told I know that I've said this in college to teachers, like, you don't go into school with a bad mood. I could have had a fight with my daughter that morning. I'm going to school and putting on my happy face because that's my job. I'm there for those kids. I'm not going to walk in grumpy. I'm there for the kids. If I'm that grumpy, don't go to school that day because that's your job, putting on your happy face and being there for those kids. So yeah, I'm glad that Anthony and Gabby felt that so that they can be that kind of teacher. That means a lot to me. And Chessy, I also wanted to say that a lot of, when reading your book, a lot of girls will come to me on the side and you made it a place where they're like, wow, I thought that only happened to me, because nobody's talking about this stuff. Nobody is talking about it. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Stacey.
I faced something similar in Chessy's book, in that as the mom of a survivor, I was navigating what to do, and somebody handed me the book. That's how I came to I Have the Right To, is one of my daughter's friends said, oh, I just read this book. It's really good. You should read it. And I read it and I felt not alone, knowing that there was another girl that was going through something similar to my daughter, knowing that there was another mom going through it. And so, Stacey, to your point of being approachable, and being the voice that somebody feels comfortable going to. Even as I read this book, Chessy and her family were people I did not know, which is for you and for your students. And knowing that I could just reach out, which I did in the moment of reading it. I reached out, and then I went on my own journey that brought me to working with the organization directly. But just hearing you say that, not only about Chessy and her family, but as a teacher, and for Gabby and for Anthony as future teachers, to really feel that, I'm going to say weight, but I feel like it's a weight in a good way, to know that you can be that person. You can be that one that students approach. You can be the one that the student feels comfortable saying, hey, look, this rough thing really happened. And it doesn't have to be something as in-depth and as impactful as assault. It could be something like, I did have a fight with my mom this morning, and I'm just feeling really off. And being that teacher and that person that the students can come to is what opens the door for when something bigger does happen in life. You have the opportunity to be that sounding board, that safe space. And so, Stacey, thank you for being so approachable for your students, and also to see that impacted Gabby and Anthony. And I can tell that they're going to be those kinds of teachers that are going to bring that to their students as well. So I'm so grateful for this whole circle. Before we close out, we ask the same question to all of our guests. And so I'm going to pose it to each of you. And I think it's easier if I just say who should answer in the order, just so we're not guessing who's going to answer. So I'll go Gabby, and then Anthony, and then Stacey. And the question is, what do you have the right to?
So I have the right to learn and be educated and to just be myself. And I have the right to express myself freely, to have friendships, to say no, to say yes, to like things, not like things, to have people around me that support me, to be a good friend, really just to live a healthy life as best as I can.
Whenever I read the I Have a Right To, or I think of Chessy, this is going to sound silly for a second, but I always think of Miley Cyrus, It's the Climb all the time. Because when I do look at that, it's no matter how big the mountain seems or how small it may make you seem, you always have the right to try and do the right thing and go forward. And it even says I might fail, I might do whatever, but regardless of who tells you what or what happens, you have the right to chase what you want to chase and do the thing you want to do. And if it makes your heart happy and full, chase it all you want, no matter what. Even if it seems like it's the biggest mountain and you're that little, one step at a time, just keep walking and you conquer the next one after the next. And there's going to be trips and stumbles and falls, but you have the right to always try and move forward. And I think that's one of the most powerful things, because she got to keep moving forward. You showed that it's possible. the mountain might seem huge and like it might be a mountain to a molehill. It doesn't matter. It's how you tackle the problem. And I think that's like really powerful out of her message and her story and even talking to her today.
I think as a retired high school teacher, now teaching college, I have the right to continue educating students, even if it's in a different way, to hopefully continue to make this change in education and to provide my students at Adelphi with also a resource. Every time at the end of the semester, I'm like, email me anytime you want me to share my stuff. I'll share with you. You have any questions? And sometimes students do reach out. So, I have the right to continue to make a difference that I wasn't sure I was going to continue with. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your I have the right to statements and for sharing all of your expertise and reflections on the podcast with us today. And I'm so excited to see where the future takes you both, Gabby and Anthony. And I know that your students in the future will be so impacted by your genuine desire to teach them what they need to know to be full, happy, healthy human beings. And Professor Balducci, your dedication to your students has obviously changed lives and is just so wonderful to witness.
Thank you so much, Chessy.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with other parents, educators, and advocates. Don't forget to subscribe to Aspire for more powerful conversations and follow I Have the Right To on all of your social media platforms. Until next time, stay empowered and keep the conversations going.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetherightto.org.